With Taunton Racecourse now about 2 miles away and visible in the distance, it's time for some reflections on this fourth leg from Bath to Taunton. James, my brother, and I left Bath at about 9:30 on Tuesday morning in what can only be described as a complete pea souper of fog. Some very odd people were playing golf as we left. I would have thought it was virtually impossible to have seen a well-struck putt where that had ended up, never mind to have seen a ripped driver down the middle or indeed either side. Anyway, to be honest, it was a very frustrating start because the fog was so thick that we felt rather like being in an unfamiliar room that's pitch dark in the middle of the night when you wake up and you're fumbling around for the light switch. You know, we were very much fumbling around for the footpath that we needed, and we spent probably the best part of an hour going anything but in the right direction through very wet fields. Trainers got soaked, socks got soaked, and it really wasn't the ideal start, but thank God after about an hour of faffing about we found the footpath and started to make decent progress. Sun came out, we got out of the outskirts of Bath and its suburbs and into some really beautiful countryside. However, it did come with a slight downside from our perspective in that it was very hilly. We hit the Mendips and we seemed to be going up and up and up and never going down. Beautiful views, amazing countryside, really was absolutely glorious. Had one rather tricky moment in a field with an awful lot of cows and one absolutely enormous bull. Now, I don't know very much about bulls, but it looked, I didn't know what type it was or whether it was likely to have a go at us. I was quite glad that Walking the Course's livery is essentially blue and white rather than the Racing Welfare red. Anyway, this bull was happy to leave us be and we moved on. It was a limousine bull, for those who are interested. As the day went on, James, who is pretty fit, has done a couple of marathons. I think he found the going pretty tough. I think he'd gained a respect for long distance walking by the end of the day, and there were two particularly fine moments from him. Firstly, when I made comment at about 5 o'clock that it's amazing how even when you're walking you go through spells of feeling, really pretty awful. And then feeling, really quite good again quite shortly afterwards. His comment was that, he last felt good at about 12:30 and didn't expect to feel good again until Thursday. The other great moment was very near the end of the day when we suddenly found ourselves on top of a hill in the most unbelievable surroundings with an incredible view down over the whole of the Somerset Levels. And we came into Wookey Hole, having had a message from Minty on the mobile that she was parked in the car park of the Wookey Hole Inn, which perked James up in a way that I really wouldn't have thought was possible. We fired a very rapid text back to Minty that we would like, please, 1 pint of ginger beer, 1 pint of ginger beer shandy, 1 pint of orange juice and lemonade, and 1 pint of Guinness. To which she asked, who are we meeting? To which the answer was no one, we're just very thirsty. So day one was at an end, 27 miles, not all of them in the right direction, but essentially a satisfactory day, and a day on which I felt quite pleased that I felt in better physical shape than I expected to at the end of it. Can't say the same for James.
27 miles, just arrived in Wookey Hole, brother crippled.
Second day was completely different actually. We spent practically all of it in the Somerset Levels, which really are as flat as a shirt front, and we bypassed Glastonbury. Thank heavens we didn't have to ascend to the Tor. Went through a very attractive RSPB reserve, although I can't say we saw any birds of any great interest, and frankly they had been there. I'm not sure that either James or I would have noticed them. We passed a rather bizarre farm who had emus and alpacas on display, but nothing else. but it turned into a rather more difficult day, because late in the day, probably about 7 or 8 miles past Glastonbury, we found ourselves on the main road that links Taunton to Glastonbury, which was A, extremely busy, B, not exactly short of big lorries, C, completely devoid of any pavement, and D, quite frequently devoid of any meaningful verge. So it was a very, very uncomfortable few miles we had there, because frankly when traffic came from both directions we had to hop up into the verge and practically get into the hedge, which was not ideal, but you know, when we looked to either side it was blindingly obvious with all these water channels crisscrossing the fields. There was no alternative, and hence why the route was what the route was. James left at about 4:30, having covered a further 18 miles or so. I think with as I say, a newfound respect for long distance walking. I ploughed on for a bit, but then I suffered a bit of a technology failure in that the power cable that runs from my battery pack to my sat-nav device broke, and therefore I was entirely at the mercy of what remained in the battery of the sat-nav, which sadly wasn't much. So I fairly shortly, about 3 miles later, had to call it a day. So that brings us to this morning. A pretty uneventful morning, really. Beautiful day again. Can't believe how lucky I've been. Leg 4, finishing the line. I can now declare that leg 4 is officially complete.